Hey guys, it's me Henry, aka That Channel Guy, and on today's episode I'm doing something that's a little bit different from what I normally do on the channel. If you guys are new to the channel, normally I review scientific research and basically it tends to be on healthcare related topics and basically relay the findings to you guys at home. But in today's episode I'm discussing my experiences of studying graduate entry medicine in the UK and just again general hints and tips when considering to apply to a graduate entry course, as well as other important topics such as funding, different courses and entrance exams. So the first point, and probably one of the most important things, I guess, to just take into consideration is funding your graduate entry course. So in the UK, obviously your funding situation will change based on whether or not you're a resident of Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland or England. For the purposes of this video, I'm talking about my experience as being a resident of England, so therefore I got my loan through Student Finance England. So in a normal standard graduate entry course, you have 4 years, and then your first year, basically your breakdown of the finance is the following. So in terms of your tuition fees, you're expected to pay about a third of the tuition fee for the year. So it tends to be roughly about £3,700-ish, I think, at the moment, unless the fees change. And then the rest is covered by, for me, Student Finance England. In terms of maintenance, that's where it changes a little bit. So you have your standard maintenance grant that's given to you, or standard maintenance loan, I should say, because you have to pay it back. And that, for me, in my first year, was just a little bit less than £2,000. And then the rest of the money had to come from savings. I think this brings us on to an important point in that many people, obviously, when they're applying for graduate entry medicine, they come from a variety of different backgrounds. And for me personally, you know, as soon as I finished my undergraduate studies, I knew I wanted to do graduate entry medicine, and I managed to get a job, and I was lucky enough to get a job that allowed me to build up a bit of savings in order to do so, and that was a job working for a pharmaceutical company. So in my first year, I basically used my savings from that job in order to basically buffer up the rest of my maintenance so I could actually live fairly comfortably. As your course progresses in your second to fourth years, obviously your funding changes a little bit, but actually it's quite beneficial in the way it does. So that initial third of the tuition fee that you had to pay in your first year, you don't really need to worry about that anymore. That comes under an NHS Bursary. So you apply to NHS Bursary and they will pay that third, and then the other 2/3 tends to come from student finance. In terms of your maintenance loan, basically you're entitled to the same amount, more or less, from student finance. And in addition to that, you can also apply to NHS bursaries for a maintenance grant. Now, this could be either means tested or non-means tested. And if it's a non-means tested, you get £1,000 if you're in London, if you're studying in a university outside of London, or if you're at home. And this is a screenshot from one of the basic application books that NHS Bursaries offers, which breaks down how much funding you're entitled to. And I'll leave a link in the description below to that resource. The second thing, again, is a means tested, and that is completely dependent on your household income. So normally it depends on the income of your parents, and again, that will reflect how much money you're given. There's an additional 2 things to think about with NHS bursaries. So the first thing really is that you also get an allowance for additional weeks. So NHS Bursary standardizes it as a normal academic year is 30 weeks plus 3 days, to the best of my knowledge. Any additional weeks that you do at placement above that amount, you are entitled to an additional bit of funding per week. And this is another screenshot which shows you that breakdown. So if you're in your London university and you're studying in London, doing a graduate entry course, you're entitled to slightly more. And again, if you're outside of London, it's slightly less. And if you live with your parents, again, slightly less. The fourth thing to take into consideration is with NHS bursaries, they also offer some support in terms of childcare and also if you have any dependents. So that would also change how much money you're given in terms of that maintenance grant. So that can be really beneficial, especially if you have young ones or you have any members of your family that are dependent on you. The last thing to say is in terms of costs that are associated with going to placement, so travel costs, those are reimbursed by NHS bursaries, and that tends to be from year 2 to year 4. So for example, I drive to hospital more or less every day, and that petrol cost is reimbursed to myself by a travel reimbursement from NHS bursaries. So I guess the main point really is that there's a lot of funding out there in terms of helping you do a graduate entry course. I haven't spoken about the additional sources of funding that are out there, such as university hardship funds. I know my university particularly has a hardship fund, and a couple of my colleagues have applied to it, and that's been, you know, up to, in one case, £2,000. There's also additional grants and scholarships that are associated with each university, and those things are obviously worth considering and thinking about when you're looking at different universities for your applications. I think the key take-home point is that if you're really considering doing graduate entry medicine and you're possibly in your undergrad, then just think about what you would like to do in the year between studying your undergrad and doing the graduate entry course. So if you take more than 1 year, or if you do some additional research, etc., just think about what employment you're going to seek. And in terms of, if you can manage to get something that's fairly well paid and where you can live comfortably and put quite a bit of money into your savings, it really does help, and it does take the stress out of funding the graduate entry course. I think the only other thing to add is basically all of us within the cohort, and there's about 40 of us in my cohort this year, and we all have additional part-time jobs that we do, and this tends to be odd weekends here and there, and most of that is healthcare related. So some of us are basically HCAs, so healthcare assistants, and we'll do that on the weekends. Some of us have backgrounds in pharmacy and they do pharmacy shifts, and then others just basically work in retail or just do general bar work. And again, throughout the year when it gets a bit closer to exam time, obviously you basically can't do that as much, so you have to take that into consideration. But again, key take-home message is there's plenty available funding out there in terms of helping you do a graduate entry course. The second thing that I want to discuss, which should ping down here as a nice little reminder, is entry exams. So in the UK, you have the GAMSAT, the UK CAT, and the BMAT. In terms of my experiences, I did the UK CAT. In terms of people in my cohort, they did the UK CAT and the GAMSAT. I don't know many people that have done the BMAT, and the reason really is that there's only, I think, Oxford, Cambridge, and Imperial, to the best of my knowledge, that still uses the BMAT. But I'll leave a link to something called the Medic Portal, which is below, and that gives you a breakdown of each university, whether or not they offer a graduate entry course and what entry requirements / additional exams you need to take. So most universities want the UK CAT or the GAMSAT. And I think in terms of which ones you do, I think it's personal preference. So UK CAT is an aptitude test, it's fairly standard. Again, it's no true reflection of your academic ability at all. It just helps universities try and, again, grade applicants in terms of the UK CAT score, because they get so many applicants per place on the course, so they have to have additional criteria. The GAMSAT is obviously one hell of exam. It's 6 hours, I think, and again, that's multiple different sections to the exam as well. If you are thinking about taking the GAMSAT, then again, go for it, prepare for it. It offers the additional benefit if you take 2 aptitude tests, or if you take 2 of the additional tests, such as the UK CAT and the GAMSAT, because it means basically if your GAMSAT score is good, then you can apply to the GAMSAT universities. If your UK CAT score is really good, you can apply to the UK CAT universities. But if they're poor or whatever, then you can mix and match and see which one you'll be strongest in terms of your application, whether or not it's GAMSAT or UK CAT. So the third thing really is, what is a graduate entry course like? Does it differ that much from a standard 5-year course? What's the makeup, the demographic of people that are on it, etc., etc., etc. I think the first thing to take home is that a graduate entry course in medicine is, again, 4 years. It tends to be the case in your first year. You have to learn the first 2 years of knowledge on the standard 5-year course, and hopefully that makes sense. So in your first year, and for me in particular, being a Birmingham grad, it was really intense because you had to cram so much knowledge from those first 2 years. It's not impossible. I think the fact that you've done a degree before really helps you, because obviously you, by that stage, have developed your own learning techniques and your own ways of revising, etc., that come quite handy when you're trying to learn that much knowledge. It's not difficult knowledge, it's just in terms of the actual, sheer amount that you have to learn by the end of the year. I think the other thing to take home is also the fact that your cohort, especially the cases with mine, is really supportive in the graduate entry courses. Everyone helps each other out, everyone shares resources, and it's just a collective community in terms of just trying to help us all get through that first year, because it is quite tough. I think in terms of when you apply for graduate entry medicine, one of the things that you need to think about, and when you have a look at different universities, is just how they structure their courses. So some universities have their own dedicated graduate entry courses, where you're in one cohort in your first year, for example, and it's just all graduate entry medics, and you have a set learning criteria, outcomes, etc., and then you work through that in the first year. That is beneficial for a variety of reasons, but the first one is that I know some colleagues who have been to universities and done a graduate entry course where they join the standard 5-year course, and what happens is that in their first year they get access to the resources in the first and second years, and they basically just say to them, just go for it, learn as much as you can, and we'll test you at the end of the year. In the universities that offer actual dedicated graduate entry courses, it tends to be a little bit more structured in terms of they have their own ways of basically structuring the course, and it tends to be in terms of PBL. So we'll come on to that in later half of the video, is again just looking at the different structures of the courses, whether or not it's PBL or more of a traditional based course. I think the other thing to think about in this section is a lot of people worry that they're too old to do the course, or that it's no longer, they're past that point in their lives. And I would think, the thing to think about really is number one, do you really want to do it? And a lot of people will be saying yes. And number two, just think about, well, if you're really dedicated about doing graduate entry medicine, just think about where you will be in terms of when you actually graduate from the course, when you do your 2 foundation years as a doctor. You know, if you already have an idea of what speciality you want to go to, just have a think, you know, how old you will be by the time you reach that point. And then you'll be able to gauge whether or not it's appropriate for you. And for most of the people in my cohort, some of them came straight out of an undergraduate degree, so they started the course when they were about 22. Other people like myself had a year where they were about 23 when they started. Other people have had like 3 or 4 years out where they've just been working. They've done basically other professions and other career paths in that time, and they've decided to do graduate entry medicine. Other people have done further research, so they did PhDs, and so you have a real spread of people from just basically finished their undergrad degree all the way up to people that have done postgrads, etc., and are probably in their 30s by the time they actually start the course. So again, don't be disconcerted about how old you are. I don't think it's really that much of a hindrance. I think, again, the collective environment on most of these graduate entry courses is really, really supportive, so it should really help you in that respect as well. So in addition, the other thing I want to talk about is like, what do you study at undergrads if you're already thinking about doing a graduate entry course? What things are beneficial? Are you put at a disadvantage if you study a non-science degree, for example? So I can't actually remember what point we're on. I'm going to say 5. Probably dead wrong. But in terms of this point, I would say, you know, doing a non-science degree is not detrimental in any respect. I know a few people that have done non-science degrees that have done graduate entry medicine and have been just fine. I think doing a science degree adds some additional benefits in terms of being familiar with basically topics that you've already encountered when you do the graduate entry course. But again, if you've done a non-science degree, it actually in some respects gives you a completely new or different set of skills compared to other people that have done a science degree and have a science background. That actually can be pretty beneficial in terms of your clinical practice. I know a number of people that have done things such as psychology and a number of the other different humanities, and they're actually excellent in terms of their communication, more so than the people that have probably done some really science, research heavy undergrad degrees. So that's just one thing to think about. In terms of what you study for an undergrad, I think just study something that you're passionate about, something that you're interested in, because you still have to drag yourself through 3 years of doing that course. So for me, I study microbiology, and I've always been really interested in bacteria and viruses and different disease processes and how they actually happen in terms of at the molecular level. So for me, that was what I wanted to study, and at that time I wasn't exactly sure that I wanted to do graduate entry medicine. It was only in my 3rd year that I became more determined that I definitely needed to do it, and that's definitely the career path I wanted to go down. I think the only other thing to think about is, you know, if you're thinking you don't want to do undergrad medicine and you want to do graduate entry medicine and you want to do another degree but you're not sure what to do, again, just think about what you want to do. But also, from my perspective and the people that I know on my cohort, the people that have done pharmacy as an undergrad have actually benefited in so many ways. I think pharmacy is a great degree in itself. I think it gives you good overall knowledge, obviously, about different drugs, etc., and different regimes. And I think the actual biggest advantage it offers is that the people that are pharmacists that are studying graduate entry medicine can actually pick up pharmacy shifts on the weekends and stuff, and they can get an additional sources of income from this, and they're pretty comfortable. And I would just say overall, if I was to pick one that was probably more applicable for doing graduate entry medicine, pharmacy is probably the best one. But again, the most important thing is that you guys do something that you actually enjoy for your undergrad, whatever that may be. So I think we're on the 6th point. I'm pretty sure it will appear just down here, so you guys will know what point we're actually on at this point. This point is basically how competitive are the courses, and the answer is very competitive. You're looking at like probably 40 plus people applying per place, and some universities don't even actually publish how many applicants they get per year, but it's very competitive. I think with this point in particular, just don't be disheartened about how competitive it is. It doesn't really matter as long as your application is pretty solid. So, you know, you've got good work experience, you've got a good background in terms of, you know, you've got a 2-1 in your degree, you've got a decent GAMSAT or UK CAT score. And I think the combination of those factors will be enough, as well as, you know, having a good personal statement to obtain an interview. And that's just really the main aim of the game, is just to obtain an interview. And then at the interview stage, you can really, really shine and hopefully get a place. So do not be put off by how competitive it is. Just make sure that if you put an application in, it's as strong as it possibly can be. So the last point is there any difference between the courses? So I already elaborated on the fact that in the graduate entry course, in the 1st year, it can actually change depending on what university you go to. But in addition to that, certain universities place more of an emphasis on PBL, which is problem-based learning, versus the traditional lecture-based style. And for each of you guys at home, just have a little think about, research both styles. Obviously, most of you have probably experienced the traditional lecture-based style in your undergrad degrees, which is fantastic. Just have a little read about PBL. Personally, for me, I did PBL in my first year, and it was really, really good. I actually enjoyed it because I think the main advantage of PBL is that if you're an independent learner, i.e. you don't really get that much from lectures, or you go home and you actually like to look at topics, research them, read up about them, make your own notes, PBL is actually pretty beneficial. I think the main thing people struggle with PBL is that because each week in PBL you'll get given a set list of learning outcomes, and obviously people will go away and learn different things about each of those learning outcomes, but again, it's not that detrimental. You just have to make sure that you cover the key things with PBL. But the key point is just have a little read about how each course is structured and what would be your preference in terms of how you learn. Because if anything, if your main aim is to get onto a graduate entry course, then fine. But in terms of when it comes to the interview time, they might ping you across a question of like, oh, do you think we get on well with the PBL process? What do you think about PBL? What do you think about a traditional lecture-based system? How do you learn, etc., etc., etc. And just be prepared to have an answer for those questions. So guys, that's basically it. I think the last thing I will talk about is whether or not it's been worth it. So I'm currently in my final year, and I can honestly, hand on heart, say that I've really, really enjoyed this course. It's been fantastic. It's been really, really challenging at certain times, but it's been great to be part of a cohort that's really, really supportive, and I've got a load of great friends that I've made throughout the years. I think, again, yeah, it's been overall, it's been really worth it. And I think if you're considering it, then by all means, please do go for it. Just remember, in order to get to the end point, in order to get that place, you have to be really, really driven, and you have to really, really want this. So if you really, really want it, and you think you have the right backgrounds, and you make a pretty competitive application, then please do go for it. I do encourage it. Don't worry about funding and things like that. There is funding out there. I think just take home some of the key points I've mentioned in the earlier points. And again, if you guys have any extra questions or extra sections that you want me to cover, I tried to cover what I thought was the most important things. Please do leave a comment in the comment section. I'll try and answer them as many as I possibly can, or make another video to discuss graduate entry medicine. But I hope you guys have enjoyed the content in this video. If you have, then please like and subscribe. Helps me out quite a great deal. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care.